Welcome. South African Chamber of Commerce is got back, a good friend of ours. We've seen Erica a number of times. I am Sharon Constanson. I'm chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce, and we'll be in conversation with Erica today. Erica actually runs a radio program as well, where she talks to these issues on a weekly basis. She's highly educated in all the right places. And the one that I find so fascinating is positive psychology is her one degree. So really, I thought it was psychology, positive psychology. Isn't it so critical that we actually think positively? And what I would like all of you to take away from here today is, how can we internalize our own happiness and well-being with the tips and tricks we're going to learn, and make it a better life for everybody around us, at home and at work. I think maybe to begin, Erica, lovely to have you back. Please share with us who you are, why you're passionate about these things, and sort of what kind, just in a sort of high-level summary, what kind of value you bring to individuals.
Fantastic. So Sharon, can you hear me loud, long and clear from
loud
load shedding Cape Town? But I think the electricity has just come on, so we have so many blessings. I just want to say, before I introduce myself, thank you so much for an incredible intro. And just, I want to pick up on 2 or 3 points that you made. The first thing, that you normalize the struggle of well-being for all of us. You know, all of us are under a lot of pressure, under a lot of stress. We are in environments of accelerating change, fragmented attention. The stress is higher than it's ever been, and we know that many more people are struggling mentally than ever before in the history of humankind, and in the golden age of humanity, where actually we have more, we live longer, we are healthier, we have more choice. So it's quite curious. I'll get back to the statistics later. But I just want to normalize the struggle, and that this talk is for each and every one of us here today. And the invitation to listeners is, please, I'm going to try and keep it as practical and simple. And the one question I have for you today is, what can I change in my life? What one thing? Just pick one thing. I may give you 12 things, but what one thing can I do differently after today that will shift my baseline happiness from 5 or a 6 or a 7, 1 percentage point up, because everybody around you will benefit. So that's the first point I want to make. And then the second point I want to make is, Sharon, I'm so delighted for this opportunity, because you work on that forefront of leadership with boards and excos and leadership teams. We need a new way in well-being. Before we say anything else, in the olden days, if 10% of your workforce was underwater because of depression, we could have dealt with the reactive ways of well-being that we used to use. Now, when we have statistics of a third to a half of your workforce, depending on what age group you're looking at, struggling with mental wellness, we need a completely different way, and the leadership have to show the way. That's why this opportunity is so important to me, and thank you again for that. Thank you also for your friendship, because it means a lot to me. Okay, very quickly about me.
Stay close to the microphone, because when you lean back, we do lose you.
I'm going to move a little bit closer to the microphone.
Perfect.
Is that good?
Perfect. Thank you.
If you see up my one nostril, please warn me, because I can't actually see myself at all. Right. So what I want to say is, I grew up in corporate. I had 20 years, 25 years at Exco board level, working in corporate strategy, done my MBA. But the issue really is, I understand what the struggles are of the boards and C-suite, and what organizations face day to day. And because I also worked in the trenches and suffered many of the difficulties that our employees are suffering today, I really understand what business needs in this space of well-being. In parallel, I did a degree in psychology and master's degree in positive psychology. And just to help people contextualize that, positive psychology, when you think of psychology, it is the science of helping people to go from -10 to 0, how to not be ill. Where positive psychology is the science of how do you get people from 0, languishing, to a 10? How do you get people from languishing to flourishing? And then I did many qualifications in coaching, in systems coaching, really trying to understand what makes us happy, what makes for a worthwhile, fulfilling life, and what deeply motivates people to make the changes that will change everything about the way they experience their life. And then finally, as Sharon said, I've been running across most of the world's big deserts. I've done some of the world's toughest endurance races, 7-day races where you carry everything on your back. And I've won many of these races. But what is more important is that it gave me an incredible opportunity there at the edge of human endurance to test these skills, these practices, and to separate the wheat from the chaff. What really works? What actually really works in the science of well-being? And I've just recently, my book has just achieved bestseller status in South Africa. So I've written a book on the experience called Run for the Love of Life. And it's really about making the most of our human life. So Sharon, I don't know, is that enough of an introduction? Because I think that's sufficient for people to get a sense of the place I'm talking from.
I think I'm going to have to leave this thing on. I keep forgetting to turn the mute button off. I'm so used to being in a very silent environment, but I'm not as silent in this environment at the moment. But let's see how we go. You were talking about the positive psychology, and you used the word languishing, sitting at neutral. I'm languishing. I'm not sick, but I'm not flying. When you look at some of the stats as to where people are between below and above that and there, where would you say out of a population of 100, how many are above, how many are at, and how many are below your 0 mark?
A fantastic question. It is a fantastic question. And that is why this opportunity is even more important to me, because I'm sure you've had many talks about the great disconnect between leadership and what's really happening at the coalface of the organization, where in general, 84% of leaders say they prioritize well-being of the organization and of employees, and about the same amount of people say that they are desperately unhappy and not coping at work. So there's this disconnect between what's really happening. And the point I want to make is that the mental health that people are experiencing have deteriorated to such a level that this needs to become an urgent agenda item on EXCO and board, at EXCO and board level. So I'll give you some statistics, Sharon, just to really contextualize this. So since 1990 until 2017, this was the measurement period. Before, we've got BC and before COVID and after COVID. So before COVID, 2017, our global rate of depression increased by 50% globally since 1990. And if you look at the economic indicators and you look at health, longevity, child mortality, birth rate, death at birth of mothers also, every single measure that you're looking at globally, and of course, I understand that there are many environments still where this is not the norm, but as a globe, we have significantly moved upwards on the individual income economic trajectory. We earn more, live longer, are healthier, have less child mortality, and we have more choice, individual choice. We have more pleasure and opportunity for satisfaction than ever before in the history of humankind. And yet it's going up, and the depression epidemic is, the depression statistics are going up while we are in the golden age of humanity. The second point I want to make is that since COVID, so before COVID, 2017, 9 to 10% of people in the US, UK, and South Africa suffered mental struggle. And
what was that percentage?
9 to 10%. 9 to 10%.
9 to 10. Got it?
Yeah, you must move a little bit closer even.
Please.
Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
You have to warn me because I can't see myself, so I don't know.
Don't worry. I can see only your face.
If you see my forehead, please stop me. Okay.
You're fine.
But since 2017, since COVID, this is why we really need to sit up and take note. If you read one of the best reports yet done on the state of global mental health, it's done by Sapiens Lab. It involved 34 countries. This year, they're going to do 72 countries, and they will continue until they've covered the entire globe. But in their survey, what they have found was that in the core Anglo sphere, in English-speaking countries, that our depression statistics have gone through the roof. And since COVID, they've tripled. We are looking at 33% of people in South Africa and in the UK and in the US now declaring that they are mentally struggling or diagnosed with depression. 33%, that's not a number. You know, if we were in a room together today, I would ask people to look on their left and look on their right and know that one of you three, it's one of you three, are not coping. So, and what is fascinating is when you begin to look at the age cohorts and how the different age cohorts are going. If you are in the 18 to 24 year cohort, that is 1 in 2 young people are struggling mentally in the core Anglosphere. So 50% of our young people, 1 in 2, 1 in 2, 1 in 2 of our young people are not coping. And what they report is feeling overwhelming feelings of anxiety, sadness, and hopelessness.
And what do you think are the fundamentals behind those 3 words you've just given us? What is it that is different, that makes them feel like that?
So Sharon, I often get this question, and I think it's a very important question. And of course, I would be a fool if in a single discussion I try to root cause analysis why this is happening. But what I can say is, and I am going to be foolish enough to suggest some threads of why I think this is happening. But the one thing to note is that this is not just of the core Anglosphere. In every one of the 34 countries, the 18 to 24-year-olds had the lowest mental health score of any other cohort, of any other demographic, unemployed people, poor people, environments where there was massive Gini coefficient or massive differential in social status. So this is a global phenomenon. In every single country, they were worse off than anybody else, number 1. Number 2, they are most worse off in the core Anglosphere, less so in the Latin American countries that were surveyed. And I'm going to, here's the foolish part where I'm going to put my foot in it. But we do know that the 18 to 24-year-old cohort in 2010, 13 years ago, less than 13 years ago, were the happiest cohort of all demographics by far. We know that. So they've gone from here and dropped right to the bottom in 13 years. So one has to ask the question, what causes that? So we have not had global warfare. We've not had a global deterioration in economic status. The one global phenomenon that we have had is, of course, the internet and social media. And there are a lot of reports that are beginning to show the massively detrimental impact that overuse, and please note, overuse of social media is having on our young people. Because the more the overuse, I mean, we are socially comparing ourselves since forever. Who bakes the best in the village? who has the most handsome husband. The social comparison is normal. The problem now is that you have social comparison constantly dinging in your pocket, and you can't get away from it to focus on your own life. So there are real issues around developing healthy self-esteem, healthy senses of self. So that's one of the first impacts. Second impact, overuse of social media. That time spent in the netherworld of nowhere takes you away from the opportunities of actually connecting with others in person. And what do we know later when we talk about the highways of happiness? What do we know? That the single most important predictor of whether you will be happy and alive and actually reporting a fulfilled life when you're 85, the single biggest predictor is the quality of your human relationship. And what does quality mean? Quality means that relationship where I can show up as my authentic self completely, and it's not quantity, and where my stress response reduces because I'm accepted for who I am. It is completely the opposite of the social media environment.
That you've just brought a really interesting point there of being authentic, being yourself, and being comfortable in who you are gives you that happiness index in a way. It gives you that de-stress was the word that you said. They don't get anxious. And it's for the first time, I actually think I'm starting to get to understand what we're always talking about for the youth and the way they respond, because they don't have friends in the same way we might have had. We had 3 or 4 friends and you hung out with them all the time. So that has also changed. And also the work environment's changed. One of the colleagues here in this environment has just got his first job. So I was really excited and expected to see him disappear off to Slough. He's sitting here. I'm thinking, the poor young man, his first job, day 1, day 2, he's sitting in front of his computer here in his home, not out there with other colleagues where he can go and talk and socialize. And that I think that must add to it as well.
So absolutely, and you put your finger right on the pulse of things, because during the pandemic, we were separated from each other. Post-pandemic, we were certainly catapulted from the great lonely period, the great loneliness, catapulted into this online world where suddenly we've gone virtual and we never got back. I cannot tell you how many people are still suffering the consequences of the great loneliness, and then moving from there into a virtual world where that reconnection never quite happened. And now we're working hybrid, but the problem with hybrid is if it's not really well orchestrated and orchestrated, I suppose, or choreographed.
Yes.
What happens is that you have a handful of people arriving at an office that feels like a mausoleum, like actually the aircon is on and everybody's freezing to death because it's meant for 50 people, but there are 5 people at the car. So it actually even exacerbates this sense of the disconnect. So people have come into this world and we are seeing these massive depression epidemic statistics because of all these things. And then add to that the uncertainties that are coming around AI, job certainty, of course, and our environment. You know, Sharon, I swam this morning in the Atlantic Ocean. We had a little bit of a storm last night. And I cannot tell you the sadness I had to shake before this session, because it was very, very, very clear that the storm had shaken up the sewage systems all along the coast. And I got such a sense of, if this is finished, where will we go? Because we are completely depleting our natural. So on top of that, we have the ecological crisis. We have a crisis of self-esteem. We have a crisis of loneliness. and then add to this all the stress of self-reliance and job certainty, and then throw in a little bit of AI scare and a bit of work on ChatGPT, and then, it's really, one has to in these places, and that is why I keep saying that we need a new approach to happiness and the skills of well-being and building the resilience that we need in this new world. It is different to the past. So that's the first point I'm making. And the second point I really wanted to make today is that the science of well-being is new as a science. It was started 25 years ago by Dr. Martin Seligman. There is now an abundance, a massive amount of information about the practices and the skills that we can build to make ourselves happier, more resilient, and actually feeling more fulfilled and contented with our lives, more connected. This science as a theory, as a whole theory, smatterings of it has come into our secular education and learning and development and into school. Meditation apps, meditation, sessions. Yes, exercise is important, but there's no theory that binds it together. And this is why the science of happiness is so important, because it gives us a framework onto which we can hang every single thing that we now learn. Right, this gratitude practice, where does that go? Okay, that is for a cultivated mind. That's mind. The way I eat, the way I sleep, the way I move, where does that go? That is for the resilience of the body and the vitality of the body. Then there's a place you can put that, and people understand why they have to go to gym. Not because somebody told them it's a good idea, but because their creativity increases by 300%. Because their chances of being depressed rapidly. In fact, not exercising is a depressant.
Not exercising
is a depressant. Exercise is not an antidepressant. Not exercising is a depressant. Full stop. Anyway, as you can see, once I get going, because it's really important, and there's so much that we can do for addressing this depression epidemic that we are facing.
So if we're looking at the different pathways, the things we can do. So if we look to, what would you advise somebody in that 18 to 24 year category? What would you advise somebody between 25 and 40, 40 and 60 and 60 and above? What do you think is the most pertinent thing, one thing that they could each in those categories do that is meaningful and real relating to the stress that they are suffering? What is it they should do? What's their tool?
So, sure, you are asking a very big question, because of course, I am completely hardwired to very quickly answer one thing. Because there is one thing that you can do after this webinar, one thing that will significantly improve your physical, mental, and emotional health. Guaranteed. If not, find me. But I'm not going to just focus in on that. I think it's much more important to say this, and I will give the answer to that. I will. I'm not gonna leave people hanging like that. But what I do want to say is the very first thing that we can do, Sharon, across all those age groups, is to recognize that happiness is a muscle. It's not a destination. Happiness is not a destination. Happiness is a muscle. It's a skill that we have to learn, especially in a society that has taught us to value the things that bring us economic growth. Great, but not the things that make happy necessarily. We have to
make happiness.
So that doesn't necessarily make us happy. We live in a society where we've lost the trailhead to happiness because we have overvalued the things that support economic growth, but that doesn't necessarily lead to happiness. Could for some, maybe, but not necessarily. And we have completely overemphasized achievement, individualism, performance, status, wealth, all those things. In some ways necessary, but will not necessarily lead to happiness. So the first thing to recognize that happiness is a muscle and that we can all build more of it if we are willing to do it. That's the first thing. Second thing to recognize is that it's not a destination, the work never ends. And then the third thing to recognize is that one doesn't have to listen to pop psychology or random self-help gurus. There's a science of well-being that we can lean into that helps us. And very interestingly, many of the practices that I'm going to share today, they are not new. They are not new. They've come with us for the past 2,000 years. Some came to us through Buddhism, some came to us through Christianity, some came to us from Muhammad in Islam. So they are, from Hindu practice. Wherever you look, these things have been there. But there are things that we can do. And so the first thing is this understanding that happiness takes work. Some days it takes a fight. And
understanding
that happiness takes work, and that some days it is even a fight. That some days happiness is even a fight, but it's a worthy fight. So that's the first thing I want to say. And then the second thing I want to say is that there are 4 highways of happiness. I do a signature talk where I try and help people to understand this radical accountability. Because the moment you take radical accountability for doing something in your life that will lift you, in that moment, you have a chance to change your life. So I do a signature talk that I talk about the 3 highways of happiness, but today I want to cover 4 highways.
Okay, let's hear about them.
Okay, great. So to your first question, what is the one thing that you can do that will most likely change your life after this session? The first highway of happiness, and this is after 25 years of heart searching, is directly via the body. Directly via the body. Sharon, in our bodies live a genie of joie de vivre. And that genie is brought to life when you move your body. When you move your body. I've already said about the statistics of being more creative, more productive for 3 hours after any exercise. We know that CEOs, 10-year longitudinal study, more than 2,000 CEOs of listed companies, fit CEOs delivered 23% more shareholder value. So if it doesn't make the case for lunchtime running, I don't know what does. But the point being, exercise helps us to show up as our best self. The second point I already made about exercise being so important, that it is vital if you want to have good mental wellness. And this is the other problem with our younger generation, sitting 8 to 12 hours in front of screens rather than playing outside. What we do know is there's some fantastic research on where they compared 450 people, all clinically depressed, professionally diagnosed. A third of people got no intervention, they were the control group. A third of people got Zoloft, which is a Schedule 6, very effective antidepressant. And a third of people got an exercise regime. So it took about 6 weeks, more or less. The exercise worked a little bit slower than the antidepressants, but after 6 weeks, both groups showed the same level of remission from symptoms. But here is the interesting point. And I think I have mentioned this to you before, but I really wanted to sink in for people. 6 months after continuing those regimes, here is the kicker. The relapse rate in the antidepressant in the Zoloft group was something like 67%. Do you know what the relapse rate was in the exercise regime? 27.
Wow.
27% of people. So the point is, if you want to be happy, move your body. That is absolutely critical. And in my coaching practice, a lot of people ask me, oh, but how do you get started? How do you go to the gym? I don't have time. I'm a single mom. I have 2 children and a really stressful job. And there is no way I can exercise. I don't have carers. Then I say, begin the micro habit of moving. Every single time you go to the bathroom, knock out 6 sit-ups. That's it. Every time, if you drink enough water, maybe you get 6 times 5 a day, and then you have 30 sit-ups that day. Begin the micro habits. Park your car far away from where you're doing shopping. Take every opportunity to do the stairs. When you get tired after a meeting, after the Zoom meeting now, Sharon, if you have a stairwell, go to the stairwell and run up and down the stairwell 5 times. Be careful on the down, walk down on the down, but sprint up 5 times. And the science shows us that it's not necessarily about large bouts of exercise or running ultra marathons in the desert. We don't have to do that. It is about regularly moving our bodies. Set your alarm on your watch. It is the most irritating thing, but it can save your life. Every 40 minutes, your alarm goes off. Get up, stretch yourself, stretch your arms, move your body, and rub that genie of joie de vivre and let it come in and support your life. So that's the first thing, via the body.
Just quickly interrupting you, talking about speed. Just doing things in short bursts, a couple of staircases, round the block, whatever, something small. But that's what animals do in the wild. If you look at a cheetah or a lion or leopard, they are in good condition, and all they do is these bursts of energy. They don't run around all the time. They burst into energy and then they're back to normal again. And I've understood that is a part of some exercise regimes, your HIIT programs, for example, where you burn something very, very short and intense. So in 15 minutes, you can do the equivalent of an hour's worth of exercise by doing it differently. So just another thought. Anyway, you want to point to and I interrupted you.
Completely.
And I have got the questions coming through. So I've got both the chat and the Q&A coming through. So guys, I'm aware of what's coming through. Thanks.
So can I just quickly pick up on that point? If you don't have time, get yourself Google HIIT programs on the internet, do short bursts. Exactly what you just said, Sharon, because what happens in short bursts of exercise, the mitochondria in our cells, which are really the little engines that turn fuel into useful fuel packages for our body.
Mm-hmm.
The mitochondria upregulates when you do intensive training, when you do sprints. So they become more efficient as energy production engines. Interestingly enough, your endurance stuff multiplies your mitochondria. So if you want to run or walk, whatever, for half an hour, more mitochondria, and then once every day you do a quick HIIT, upregulates your mitochondria. It really, really works. We don't have to do long things, but we have to move regularly. So that's the first thing through the body. Do you know there are so many, many, many practices through the body, but I'm going to give you one more today. I'm going to give 2 more. One help. Posture. So the science shows us that how you sit actually impacts your psychology. So just where you are right now in your chair, maybe you're sitting like this, maybe you're slumping forward, whatever it is. Just square your shoulders back, sit up, and just tilt your chin down like a captain saluting almost, and put a small smile on your face, exactly like Sharon's, like a Mona Lisa smile. The moment you do that, your psychology responds to the fact that your physiology has sent you a positive signal. This is a positive way of being in the world. So use your posture. Amy Cuddy's famous TED Talk, Power Postures, whenever you go and do presentations, do a little bit of splaying, stretch your arms, take up a lot of space, but use your body to shift your psychology in the moment. So using your posture, Very interesting study. If
So
you put a
slouching
pen-
on slouching on the couch is not an equivalent to sitting upright.
Sometimes slouching is okay. We all need to rest, but if you want to be in a high performance state, please don't slouch. Nothing good will come from it. Also, when you slouch, you're compressing your diaphragm. How can the oxygen flood into your lungs and feed your brain with the fuel that it needs? So sit up. Other exercise is a very interesting psychology study. If you put a pen in your mouth like this, they then asked participants several questions and measured their levels of happiness. People who put a pen in the mouth significantly, this is one of the most robust findings repeated over and over again, were reporting much higher levels of happiness, and it was randomized properly with randomized samples than people who didn't have the pen in their mouth. Why? Because your physiology says, I'm smiling. It's not a smile, but it's sending the signal of a smile to your brain, and people respond to that. So you know that adage, fake it until you make it. Just smile. The show must go on. There's a lot to be said for that, because when you present in a particular way, your psychology follows. Last, I'll mention one more practice through the body. And the reason why the body is so powerful is because the body has the ability to bypass our sympathetic nervous system, our fight and flight response.
Mm-hmm.
So when you activate the right response in the body, it can help you to get out of fight and flight. So we know that one of the most powerful techniques to do that, to move from a place of high stress and high anxiety in 90 seconds to a place of high confidence and calm and presence in 90 seconds is using our breath. I know we all know about breath work. We probably all have a breath work practice, but there is a practice called 4-7-8, which I use before every talk or every public appearance I ever do, because it gets me in my body, it calms my mind. And when I do this practice, I can literally hear, suddenly I hear sounds that I didn't hear before because I was too in my head. Suddenly I see the people in front of me, and I am so present because people feel that I am here because I've gotten out of my head. So this 4-7-8 practice, normally I when we are together, I help people to actually experience the practice, but I'm not going to do that today. But I'll explain the practice. What you do is you breathe in for 4 counts, you hold for 7 counts, and then you exhale for 8 counts. And when you're exhaling, you imagine you exhale through your mouth, you breathe in through your nose, exhale through your mouth. You imagine a candle in front of you, and you are blowing out in a way that just makes the candle flicker. Breathe in for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. You do that 4 times, and I guarantee you that you will suddenly feel calmer, more present, and more able to speak and be in that space with clarity. So
when I speak to boards and I speak to company secretaries, I don't know your science. I'm nowhere near in your realm. But what I will say to them, for example, is when that feeling of being overwhelmed or somebody says something that angers you and you feel that flush of anger, that fight or flight that comes in. And we always say that the adage is take 10 deep breaths. Yours is slightly more scientific, but they learn that resilience and they can actually then do it in 3 deep breaths because you've learned what the 10 can do for you. The 3 then work. So you don't sit there in the boardroom going, trying to get your 10 deep breaths in. You can actually then do it in 3. And this is something we've worked on very often with people that really struggle to stay present without losing it, for want of a better word.
Completely. And in practicing it, giving that tool, what happens is we create a pause button. And the more we practice it, the bigger the pause button gets. And no matter how dark it gets around you, You know where the pause button is. You can find it. So that's fantastic, Sharon. And of course, the key is, of course, oxygenating your brain with deep breath and exhaling. The magic is on the exhale. Because I don't know if you know this, but the reason why we get so stressed, when we get into fight and flight, we tend to hold our breath. And when we hold our breath, what happens is, if you I do free diving, and in free diving, when you get that gag response, you're going to drown now. Actually, you've got 2 minutes of oxygen left still after that. It's not that you have run out of oxygen. It is that your CO2 has accumulated to a critical level. And when you then exhale, you dump the CO2. And if you do that 4 or 5 times in your practice, dumping the CO2, oh my gosh, the body relaxes suddenly. So you get out of that stress. And then to your point, deep breath oxygenates the brain, and you can think clearly, and then you can choose how you wish to behave. That's so first highway.
So we can respond instead of react.
We can respond instead of react, and respond in a way that supports our best self.
Yes, which is so absolutely critical. One of the questions that's come through. Sorry, have you finished your 4 points? Or am I interrupting?
Oh, that was the first highways of happiness.
Okay,
but if there are questions,
no, take the fourth one, and then we'll ask questions.
Okay, so second highway of happiness is through the cultivated mind. We know, and I mean, in endurance racing, the one thing that I learned in thousands and thousands of hours of being awake, sometimes for 5 days and 5 nights with almost no sleep. I've learned that when you can master your mind, you can master your life. So one of the biggest myths of happiness, Sharon, and what I can see, the greatest myth of happiness is waiting for one day when I get married, one day when I get divorced, one day when I have children, one day the children leaves home, one day when I get the corner office God, one day when I can retire and rest. You can see that we stay on this chasing towards happiness, and the frontier of happiness continuously remains out of our reach. Actually, in positive psychology, we call it hedonic adaptation, because you have now achieved that thing that you've desired with all your heart and soul, marriage. You have marriage. It's great, but does it keep you absolutely fulfilled, happy, and thriving for the rest of your life? We get used to very quickly to our new level of fortune. So even people who have won the lotto and people who have lost a limb, a year after their respective fortunes and misfortunes, they find that those two groups go back to their base level of happiness before the event. So one day when I is probably the greatest challenge in our Anglo-Saxon and in our Western world, because we're always achievement driven. We're always driven to possess something else, whether it's an accolade, a person, a possession, something. And we know that that is not. So what if we have understood that it's a myth? One day when once you've understood that everything that you are chasing towards will only temporarily satisfy you, then what else will? What else will? And when one is woken up from that misconception, the only answer is this. It is the cultivated mind, how you look after the health, the quality of your thoughts moment to moment. It is the quality of our thoughts that determine how we experience our life. So I don't know if you know this, but psychologists estimate that we have between 30 and 65,000 thoughts a day. Some people have more, some people have less. But the very interesting thing is that 95% of this is on a repeat loop.
Sorry, 95%?
On a repeat loop. So 95%, you're in the same old moat. You are playing the same old mixtape. Do you remember mixtape? when we were younger. You're playing the same old mixtape that you do every single day. The problem with that is if it is a negative mixtape of I am not good enough, the world is such and such, the people around me are such and such, if it is one of anger and disconnect and so forth, you neurons that wire together fire together. And the problem is the more what we repeat is who we become, because we create neuronal circuitry around that particular way of thinking. And if you play yourself a negative mixtape, you get into a downward spiral of negative emotion. The problem is it's not just for that day. What you repeat is who you become. So when we know that, in that instance, one begins to understand how critically important it is, moment to moment, to be aware of what the mixtape is that you are playing yourself. And so that you have choice. Maybe you are sad, and I am not saying negative emotions are bad at all. Sometimes they are some of the most powerful messengers in our life. But then, like Rumi said in the guest house, welcome them all, sit them down for a cup of tea and say, this negative emotion, sadness, perhaps, or anger, what do you want me to do so that you can leave in peace, in peace, ideally. And then you go and do that thing and you step out of that emotion. But so negative emotions is not the enemy. The issue is when it becomes repetitive and it becomes our habitual response to life. If being the victim is a habitual response, if pessimism is a habitual response, if blame or shame are habitual responses, that is who you will become.
Very, very powerful to understand that. I read a proverb the other day from somebody in the Hindu religion, and he said, the rich are the poorest group of people I've ever met. Because they're always striving for something they don't have. Money does not bring happiness. It might oil the wheels, but money in itself, there are a lot of people think, if I've got money, I'll be fine. You need some, yes, absolutely. But you don't need the huge amounts to make happy. What you're talking about is a completely different place inside myself. And here, a lot of people that are not wealthy are very happy because they've learned for themselves. I look at your dog. Your dog's got it down to a fine art. Fast asleep and relaxing, but the rest of the time he's up and about moving. Every 40 minutes, I promise you that dog's out there moving. A lesson we can all take from the pooch as well is that movement that we need to do. I just want to ask one of the questions. Why do people fight the logic that you are sharing with us that costs nothing? It takes a little bit of practice. Why would we spend money on putting stuff in our body that is medically driven, that has more side effects than it has the value it's giving in the first place, in my opinion? Why do we do that instead of listening to the learnings you're giving us? What's wrong with us? Why are we so silly?
Sure, Sharon, it's a complex answer to all of that because, so I must make this very clear. I am not discounting the need sometimes for a medical intervention for well-being. If you are neurologically challenged, or you are hormonally challenged, or you're going through menopause, or whatever is happening in your life, there is a place for medication. Medication alone is not the answer. So I just want to first say that. The second answer to your question, so actually the answer to your question is, I think because this takes work. This takes work. It's easy to blame my childhood. Many bad things happen to all of us. There is not a single person when they get to their deathbed one day, when you are lucky enough to be able to say that sentence one day, and you didn't die in childhood, there's not a single person who would say, I've lived a pain-free life. I've not had terrible things happen. I've not had challenges. Not one person on this earth escapes the human condition. The response to that could be, I take accountability for my life. I don't take responsibility, or I don't take accountability for the bad things that have happened, but I take responsibility for what I do now. The other response could be blame, victimhood, and not wanting to do the work. And the problem with that is when one chooses that pathway, everything that you are able to do to make your life better remains out of your locus of control, because you cannot change the world. You cannot change the human condition. You can't change the others. The only thing you can do in this moment, when the trigger comes, as you teach your board members, what can I do now to show up as my best self? So I think that's one of the big reasons why people resist this, because first of all, there's no money to be made in this. So, pharma, whatever, there's no money to be made in it. It sounds too simple, but the work is hard. It's a lifelong work. So getting me to the point of understanding this mixtape, we now have a choice to shift that mixtape into the opposite, into an upward spiral of positive emotion. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, she's really worth following, talks to us about the broad and build theory. When you have a positive emotion, that positive emotion increases your cognitive resources because you get out of fight and flight, so you have clarity of mind. In the state of broadened cognitive resources, you are more approachable, you're a nicer person, so there your social resources begin to build because you have more friends. You are more willing to take risks and be courageous and try things at work. You are more determined, all of those things. And then you work hard at work and you're the one getting the promotion and your colleagues like you and you have a nice fun. So the upward spiral of positive emotion creates for you social, emotional, and cognitive real resources in the world. That's why it is important to catch that downward spiral thought and shift it. And there are so many practices. And again, when I say the practices, they are simple. But my question to people who are listening today, are you doing these practices? So one of the most powerful.
Say it again.
Are you doing the practices to shift your mind into an upward spiral? One of the most powerful practices, when you notice that you are beginning to be chased by those negative thoughts, round and round the moat we go all day long, because we all get into that place. The one thing that you can immediately do, I use this in my endurance racing all the time, because I know at 80 kilometers or at 60 miles, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to struggle. Then I pull out my gratitude and my love list, the things that I am most grateful for in my life and the people I care for most in my life. And if it doesn't work there, or rather, if it does work there, I am fairly sure it will work in most circumstances in life. And it helps me. It literally shifts my psychology, which shifts my physiology.
Your performance, everything.
My performance, everything.
We are out of time.
Oh my God, how did that happen?
Exactly.
Okay,
we've run. One of the things, just very quickly, in a minute, you talk about being in the moment, being in nature, and being absorbing the quietness, the beauty, the sound, the moment of nature. One of the questions came about actually being in that your own quiet place. Just talk about that very, very quickly as your finishing point, if you don't mind.
So very finally, nature, we are not using the resource of nature enough to restore ourselves. There's a whole body of work around nature restoration theory that shows us that our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system regulates after a stressor twice as fast. So our cortisol goes down, our blood pressure goes down, adrenaline goes down, heart rate goes down twice as fast when you spend time in a naturescape than if you spend time in an urban scape. So if you're exercising, try to go outdoors, because we know that space, and the attention restoration theory tells us it's because the space is vast. The way that nature captures your attention is not the way data captures our attention. It doesn't make us get into rumination or thinking. It does the opposite. It helps us to actually cognitively relax. So make time for spending time in nature. You will recover from stress. Japanese businessmen have been doing this for hundreds of years, called Shinrin-ku, Japanese forest bathing. Go bathe in the forest. Take time out. Just find a quiet space in nature.
Well, I'm off to the bush in about 6 weeks, so I'm going to have my 3 days. You're exhausted because they wake you up so damn early, which I do anyway, and they feed you so much so that you're exhausted in a different way. But your mind, to your point, is worrying about watching them and doing what's happening in that environment than actually pondering about my own issues. So that sort of changes the psychology. But I'm going to have to be really, really rude to both of us who are having so much fun, and so is everyone else who's with us, is we're going to need to say love you and goodbye. I know we have got a session planned for round about September, if I remember correctly, on a completely different topic, but we'll bring that to our audience in July. We'll be announcing what we're going to be doing in September with you.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate the time together. And as you can see, lost time completely in enjoying ourselves and being in the moment. So apologies to everyone that we've run a few moments over time, but thanks for your questions. Do appreciate it. And quite a few thank yous are coming through. Thank you very much, Erica.
Thank you, Sharon.
You're a star. All the best.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Jess. Bye.